Okay. Well, I'm going to get started as we're letting folks in. I just want to say thank you for everyone who's joining us today for this special Creative Educator Series. My name is Sabah Ghole. I'm one of the co-founders of NuVu. And as many of you know, most of our CES sessions have focused on topics around creative education. This one's going to be formatted a little bit differently. We have a really special session today. It's a fireside conversation between two innovators in the education field, my co-founder, Saeed Arida, and Mitch Resnick, founder of Scratch and Lifelong Kindergarten Group. I'll let Saeed do the formal, detailed introduction for Mitch. For those of you that are new here, this series is a part of NuVu's larger initiatives that we do. And NuVu is an organization that's dedicated to bringing creative education to students around the world. We work with a lot of partner schools, and we're really excited to see some of the familiar faces in the audience today. And one final announcement before I hand it over to Saeed. Just a quick announcement for those that are interested in learning more about NuVu's pedagogy and interested in really upskilling their project-based learning experiences and the work that they do in classrooms. Please join us this summer for our NuVuX Innovation Camp for Educators. The link is down below, and we hope to see you there. And before I hand it over to Saeed, if there are questions during the course of the fireside chat, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the session. We'll have a Q&A opportunity to discuss a lot of your questions and inquiries. And with that, I want to hand it over to Saeed and Mitch.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having us in your office, Mitch. And so as Sabah mentioned, this is the first time we do a fireside chat. We usually demonstrate the technology, or we talk about pedagogy, or we talk about what's going on in the world in education. And so this is the first time we are actually having a live session where we talk about a lot of really exciting things. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. And thanks for Mitch for agreeing to be the first person to do that. Mitch has been from my first days of MIT here in 2002, as supportive as it can be for my work and for creative education in general. And I don't know if you would remember that you wrote my recommendation for the PhD program. I will credit your recommendation for us. And I think at the time when I was working with one of Mitch's PhD students, Oren Zuckerman, his name, at that time, I really thought of myself only as an architect and designer and not as an educator. And I came to MIT basically for that sole purpose. But then I think, like, in the back of my mind, that really planted the seed for basically all the work that I have done after that in terms of my PhD research, in terms of starting NuVu. And it's kind of amazing to connect back with Mitch around these subjects again. And
well, thanks a lot for inviting me. So it's great to have this conversation with you, and a lot of great memories from those more than 20 years now. And now I've just been inspired by the way you've taken a lot of the ideas we've talked about and put them into practice at NuVu. So it's great to see what's happening there, and great to have a chance to talk more about it today.
Thank you. All right, so we gotta really go back in history a little bit about the early beginnings, and everybody knows that you are at the Media Lab. Probably a lot of you are familiar with the work that Mitch did with the Seymour Papert early on. That was very foundational to Scratch. But I wanted to go even further than that. How was it growing up? What kind of students were you? And how did you deal with school at the time? What kind of learning experiences stood out to you as you were going through kind of your learning journey? And I know we've talked about this before, that your kind of journey is not a straight line. You studied physics as undergrad, you became a journalist, and then you became interested in education and creative learning. Then you came to the Media Lab, and kind of the rest is history. Scratch was created, 100 million people and more kind of use it. And so tell us about how that kind of, what seeded a lot of these ideas that came to kind of materialize as we see them today.
Well, it's nice to look back at the beginnings, because I do think it makes a difference on early life experiences. And you asked what type of student I was in school. And actually, I always did well in school. But as I look back, I sometimes question my experience in school because I think a big part of what I was learning was how to do well at school. And I was proud of doing well at school. But when I look back, that's not where I had my most important learning experiences. I think I was very fortunate to grow up in a household where my parents were very supportive of, there were 3 kids, an older sister, younger brother, and myself, of supporting us in experimenting and trying new things, of supporting our curiosity. And I think that made a big difference. And they allowed me to try many different things. And I think the things that stand out to me when I look back are opportunities when I was trying to create things, but it was usually outside of school. Like I enjoyed playing sports, but even more, I remember when I tried to create things around sports. Like we had a little backyard and my parents were tolerant to let me dig it up and make a golf hole and make my own little golf course there. And I played with other friends and my siblings. Or for one year at a birthday, I got a little dark room set. But then I used it in somewhat creative ways of trying to take pictures and put them together, make different types of birthday cards for friends and family. So I was trying to create things, but also ways to connect with other people. And maybe one other thing that comes to mind, I do think I went to a summer camp that was important in my experience. And this was a summer camp which is now closed, but it was an important experience for me. And it was a summer camp that had been started in the early 1900s by immigrant Jews who had been coming from Eastern Europe, escaping persecution. And they were mostly living in New York City. And they sent their children and then grandchildren to this camp in the countryside. But what I remember most was great being outside and doing different activities. But the end of every summer, it was different. A lot of camps, they have like a color war of sports. In the camp I went to, there was a festival at the end of the summer where every group of children, the different bunks, each one represented a different peoples of the world. And we learned the folk songs and the folk dances of different peoples. And I think the message was, we need to connect around the world. It's all one big community. And even though probably the parents and grandparents had been escaping persecution, they said we have to connect with people of different cultures. And I think that had a continuing influence. I think some of the things I do now and the global nature is me trying to continue to perpetuate the things I had in summer camp and make those type of connections around the world.
Amazing. How did it, like all of these experiences, like it seems like the community part of it was a big part of it early on, but the education and the learning piece, how did that, and the creativity, like your kind of obsession with creativity, how did that came to be?
And I think it played out over time. As you mentioned, in college, I did a lot of math and science, and I sort of was good at that, and I appreciated doing it. But when I finished college, I didn't think that's what I wanted to go into and dive into. As you mentioned, I became a journalist.
So why did you do physics initially?
Oh, I did physics partly. I think one thing that drew me into it when I was growing up, I used to just like looking at the stars, and I was just amazed by thinking about these questions. How could it go on forever, but how could it ever end? And just thinking about the vastness of time and space. And I want to understand things. So I think largely I want to understand the world.
Did it answer, studying physics, did it answer those questions?
Well, it did give me some new insights, but only up to a point. I think I got some new insights about how it was that the world, how the universe could go on forever, but then wrap back around itself. So it helped answer some of those paradoxes. But then after a while, I felt I was just getting, all caught up in equations, and it just became manipulating equations, and that wasn't so interesting. I wanted sort of the bigger insights. I think maybe I was also influenced growing up. I enjoyed going to the Science Museum, and that sparked my curiosity about different things about the world. But I think just going more deeply, and as I said, it felt like I was just then manipulating equations, didn't feel so interesting to me. And when I started as a journalist, I was a science and technology journalist, so I was helping others understand. And I think that's maybe the stronger connecting thread, is helping people understand things. So I became a journalist because I enjoyed trying to understand, and then I enjoyed trying to explain things.
So what did you explain? What were we interested in explaining at the time?
Well, I was sort of anything. So at the time, I was doing different things. So when I was a journalist, I was writing about technology. So it's the early days of personal computers. So I was explaining how could these new this was 1978 to 83. It was right when personal computers were introduced. So I was writing articles about how our personal computers going to change people's lives, the way they work, the way they play. So I was trying to help people open up their minds to the possibilities of the technology. And that's where I became more interested in the technology and thinking about, what are the possibilities. But then I had a big transition when I was writing about this as a journalist. But one person I went to see at one conference was Seymour Papert, who you mentioned was one of the pioneers of technology and learning and one of the founders of the Media Lab. And when I saw Seymour talk, it really inspired me. Because actually, when I was writing about technology, I was more writing about things you could do with the technology. And Seymour was talking more about how technology could help us think about ourselves in new ways and to think in new ways. And somehow that seemed more exciting than just what you can accomplish with the technology. So I really got inspired by the way Seymour saw the technology as a way for young people growing up. The big point he was making that I think inspired me from the beginning was at the beginning of the personal computer, and unfortunately still too much this way today, they saw that, well, with kids in education, you could have the computer deliver instruction. Like it could replace the teacher, deliver instruction, and it could be even better. You could personalize it. But Seymour said, no, that's not the way. It's not that the computer should deliver instruction.
The echoes of replacing a teacher is still very much
still there.
Now.
But Seymour said, no, that's not the way to think. The computer, it's a tool, a medium that lets the learner create things and express themselves and to see the world in new ways, and to see themselves in new ways.
This is a slight detour because we're going to talk about AI later on. As you were kind of writing about the emergence of personal computers and then you saw Seymour, did people see personal computers the same way we see AI these days? Like, do you think it had the same kind of aura?
Yeah, I do think that if I look back over the 50 years now, maybe I'd see three big waves. Because at the time, people did have this sense of these computers, they're going to change a lot of things, but we don't know exactly how. And then 20 years later, the internet started to become more widespread, and people felt the internet's going to change everything in society, but we're not quite sure how. And I think right now we're at that same moment in AI, where people feel it's going to change things, but we don't know how. But in all those cases, I think an important thing, we can come back to this later, is we shouldn't just say, we don't know how, we have to sit back and watch to see what happens. We can make a difference. We can choose how to make use. The personal computer could be used in all these ways. It could be used to deliver information, or it could be used as a tool for expression. The internet can be used in many ways, and similar with AI, it could be used in different ways. And I think it's up to us to try to say, this is how we want to use it to align with our values of how we want to live, learn, and play.
And so this is, we were talking yesterday about, how Seymour kind of saw creativity and how you also had your own kind of version of that. I would love to kind of talk more about this, but also in particular, like even when you were thinking about creative education and kids early on in the 90s, I'm sure you had a lot of ideas about how that can be at the time. Did that change slightly or change in a big way and until now?
Well, it certainly has continued to evolve over time. But I think the thing that's always been at the core is being very child-centered, learner-centered, that the learner should be making the choices, and we wanted to support the learner in exploring, experimenting, expressing themselves. That part never changes. Probably the thing that I've learned the most through all the different, variations and different projects we've worked on through the years is focusing more on the social dimension of learning. I think in the very beginning, I was thinking more about the individual learner and how they could interact with the world around them, understand things in new ways, create things in new ways. And I think over time that social dimension has been increasingly important, and it's affected the ways we design technologies. But as you know, it's over the years we've developed these guiding principles that we call the 4 P's of creative learning: projects, passion, peers, and play. At the very beginning, if I tried to do it, I might not have mentioned peers. I think from the beginning, I always was very focused on a project-based approach, because I knew I learned the most by working on projects when I was growing up, and I felt that that was the way to explore something. And passion, was something. Building on your own interest is another thing I learned from Seymour, and it made sense to me that you learn the most and are willing to work longer and harder. And then from my collaborators, Natalie Rusk, who's a longtime collaborator, she was always focused on children's motivation and how it is that opens up new possibilities. So I think that's been there from the beginning. And a playful spirit has been there. And when I say play, it's not just about laughing and having fun. It's more of an attitude, a way of experimenting and exploring. And I knew that was always important. But the peers part and working with others, I think over time I've developed a greater and greater appreciation for that.
So what happens if you drop one of the 4 B's? I'm asking this question because can creativity exist in a vacuum or outside of that social kind of construct that you have?
Oh, well, I think to different degrees. It's not an all or nothing. And even when in the most creative experiences, some of it is part of social engagement. But then sometimes it is good to stay by yourself and just focus on something by yourself. So actually, I know of also someone that you respected, Edith Ackerman, a former colleague and friend. She would always talk about sort of spending some of the time reaching out and then some of the time coming back, or then diving in and then stepping back and reflecting. So I think we go through these different phases as part of the creative process, and some are more social, some less. So I think it's a combination. I think the most creative processes always have some social dimension. We're always building on the work of others or getting ideas from others and feedback from others is always a part of the process, but it's not the whole process. And sometimes some schools have gone overboard. I think in the last probably 30 years, maybe one thing, if you just look at traditional schools, they have focused somewhat more on the social and collaborative side. You go to even traditional schools, they have more things where they encourage kids to work together, sometimes even force them to work together, and it becomes artificial. So I think it's getting out there more in the world of education, but trying to have it in a more fluid state and in a way that is sort of connected to the creative process is still needs a lot of work.
So obviously a lot of these foundational things, the 4 B's and everything, how you thought about community and creativity kind of contributed to the creation of Scratch. Like I'm sure I would love to hear more, and I'm sure the audience would love to hear about the early beginnings of how Scratch came to be. I remember that was like when I was here 2003, kind of that were the early days of how you were thinking about it.
So in fact, we really started working on it just around that time, but it grew out of some work we were doing in the 90s. And at least one important influence was, I mentioned my longtime colleague and collaborator, Natalie Rusk. Natalie and I had worked a lot in the 90s on this network of after-school learning centers in communities called computer clubhouses. And we spent a lot of time working with young people, usually age 10 to 18, who were coming into these centers and using new technologies in a way to express themselves creatively, making videos and making music and making photo collages.
And what were they using as tools at the time within the clubhouse?
So the different things, they use Photoshop. Photoshop is very popular. So we use commercial software mostly, but they didn't really have good tools. They wanted to make animations and games, and they didn't have the right tools. And a lot of times for making animations and games, a programming language could be useful, but the logo programming language that my mentor, Seymour Papert, had worked on wasn't really up to the task in the 90s. The kids wanted to bring in different media and different images and sounds, and logo wasn't so well suited for that. And it wasn't so easy to use, and some of the kids had trouble using it. So we saw there was a real need. And I think we were always influenced by saying what it is that kids want to do. So we saw the youth at the clubhouse wanted to make animations and games, but they didn't have the right tools. So we really got started partly in response to what the young people wanted. And so, but we had a lot of experience with this logo language that Seymour developed, And we saw the kids would learn
Was
a
it
lot.
still in development at the time when?
The logo, there was a commercial company that was developing a commercial version that was out there, and it was still being used, fairly widely. But we saw it needed some, new things. So one of it was to add more, access to media, that we saw the kids at the clubhouse, wanted to do more multimedia things. So we knew we wanted to add that. We knew we wanted to make the activity of creating these programs easier. So we started working on the graphical programming language, where you snap blocks together. We'd done a lot of work with the Lego toy company. So blocks were probably in our minds, and you could just stack up the programming blocks the same way you stack up Lego bricks. But instead of building structures like Lego bricks, you build up behaviors.
So at that time, there was no programming language at all that uses blocks.
There were some experimental research projects that we saw. There were definitely some visual languages. A friend of ours, Alan Kay, had made he and his team had made a language called eToys. They used blocks. We felt, we were inspired by that. We felt it wasn't going to be easy enough for the kids at the clubhouse to use. And in fact, we went to Alan. We said, we're inspired. Maybe we can work together. And he said, well, why don't you work on your own, and we'll each learn from each other. And we did. We inherited some of his ideas. He took some of our ideas, but we shifted it in a way to really make it easy for kids to get started with. But then maybe one other dimension, and a lot of this is based on the timing, because we started working on Scratch. I remember having the first conversation about it with Natalie in 2001, and then we wrote a National Science Foundation proposal in 2002. And we talked about, this block-based language and letting kids work on more meaningful things with media that they wanted. But also, the internet had just started to become more widespread. So that's where the peers came in. We saw there was an opportunity, which hadn't been there before, to let kids be able to share their projects with the world, where they could both have an audience, where they could put things out and people could give them feedback. And they could see what others were doing. They could be inspired. They could collaborate in new ways. So there were a few ways in which it was different than what had been out before. So Scratch was really the first programming language that came with an online community. And I think that made a big difference. So we did those things. Actually, I'll make a short digression, but I just wrote a post this past weekend. This past weekend happened to be the 75th anniversary of the founding of the National Science Foundation. So I wrote a post of how grateful we were. In 2003, we got a 4-year, $2 million grant from the National Science Foundation to get started on Scratch. And 4 years later, we produced it and launched it. And that initial investment then led to more than 100 million kids having rich learning experiences. And it makes me sad because right now the funding for Scratch for National Science Foundation is going to be cut by more than 50% next year. So I always worry that what future innovations will never happen, because it really helped us get started. And it's not that they funded it all the way through, but they planted the seed from which it grew.
How do you think they saw it as they were reading the application for you? Like, did they think, "Wow, this is going to be $100 million thing"? No, 100 million user thing.
I'm sure they didn't. And we were ambitious, but I don't think we saw it as that big. But they were at least willing to take a risk. They knew it was a little bit different, and whether they probably didn't know the broader possibilities, but they were probably making lots of bets on different things. They were trying different things, and this is one that paid off. I mean, I think from the beginning, we were certainly hoping it could take off, and we were thinking globally from the start. Like when Scratch came out, we already had it translated to different languages, and which is a little bit, as I said, always always thinking globally. And Seymour Papert also thought globally. So I think that's another thing that attracted me to him. And Seymour was born in South Africa, and he was an activist. As a teenager, he had fought against apartheid there and got into trouble with the law, and went out of the country to go to school in England. And Seymour definitely thought, and then later came to the United States. And Seymour was always thinking globally and always trying to bring about change. And that both attracted me to him and then also re-energized me to think in those ways. So with Scratch, I did see, from the beginning, we thought of it globally. Also, we thought about it, we we sometimes said at the beginning, we wanted Scratch to appeal to kids who never imagined themselves being interested in programming or coding. So we didn't want to just reach the kids who are already into math, science, coding. We wanted to reach kids who never thought they would be. So in the design, we really thought, how can we reach broadly to reach all types of different kids? Kids who love to do art, kids who love to do music, kids who want to tell stories. So that's, we want to make sure to reach them.
So I remember back in 2003, when I was working with Oren, there was a lot of focus on testing. And so we would do our stuff, and then we will talk to a few kids, and they will test that, and we'll take that and produce the next version. I don't know how much you remember about like version 0 to version 10 of Scratch, like the early days, how much testing there was, how much it changed.
Well, one thing we did, as I mentioned, we were inspired by these after-school computer clubhouses. So there was one not so far from here that every week we would go in and test a new version. And we were lucky we had a development team that was always willing to take the things, and by the next week we'd have a new version. So we were like making an iteration every week. And I sometimes tell that story because when kids are working on projects, whether they're making a physical project with modeling clay or bricks, Lego bricks, or whatever, or if they're doing something on the screen, we always emphasize the importance of iteration, of trying something out, iterating, making a new version. And that's what we did in designing Scratch. From the beginning, there was so many different design decisions to make, and we kept trying different things and testing it out.
Does anything stand to you in terms of like, oh, this was really bad kind of iteration, that, or not bad, like it just that did not exactly work that you expected and it had to change?
Well, here's a couple things from the very early days that I remember. Like one early decision to make was, should it be 2D or 3D? And some people said, of course it should be 3D. Because at that point, kids were playing games that were all 3D. They said, so people would say that kids were accustomed to 3D. They were excited about 3D. If it had a 2D look, they wouldn't be interested in it. But we knew that we want kids to be able to create the images that they were doing. It's not easy to create your own 3D spaces. But 2D, it's easier to just use a paint program or grab an image from online, cut it out and put it in there. So, and we wanted the kids to be the creators, not just sort of manipulating things that were already there. So we decided to go with 2D, and that was, I think, a really important decision. But there's a lot back and forth. Or another decision, how much we want kids to be able to make animated stories, but should you be able to integrate video right into your Scratch project? And we tried some versions with that, and there were some things that were nice, and we've experimented later, and there have been some offshoots to do it. But in the beginning, when we tried it, we thought there was too much. Kids would just insert a video and just watch the video. And we wanted, again, them to be in control of, controlling and making it interactive. We also want to make sure it was not just linear, but interactive. So those are some like design decisions. And of course, there are lots of smaller design decisions, like whether there should be a start button or a green flag to start. There are all these different things that we were considering all the time.
I mean, I'm always amazed when I look at Scratch. Some people might see it as a platform to teach kids how to code. But ultimately, it's really what makes it so special is that creative kind of side of it. It's not just an isolated company where it's like, let's build this tool and make it work for kids. And I wonder for you if this has ultimate, that creative kind of expression piece was the piece that made it as big as it is today.
But it's certainly the part that inspired us, because from the beginning, we saw this as a tool for creative expression. And that was our goal, was to do it. Because the coding was just a means to an end for us. It was not the goal. And as Scratch came out and became popular, a lot of other people tried to do their own, mimic it in ways, but they usually focused on help kids learn to code. And for marketing purposes, that sometimes worked for them. And they were sometimes focused on helping kids, be able to grow up and become professional software developers. It's great if some kids become professional software developers, but that was never our goal. It was to let everybody be able to express themselves creatively. So we always tried to keep that front and center in our design to always think that that's going to be the thing that drives it. And it's been challenging though sometimes, even though that's our messaging is always around that. It's Scratch sometimes will be adopted in some schools just to learn coding. And then it's frustrating that they use it, they have kids learn some coding concepts, they get a test at the end of the week to see how well they learned the coding concepts, and then they put it aside and move on to something else.
And potentially all the kids are producing the same thing, which is not really the purpose of this.
And of course, also, you need time, because once you learn how to express yourself, you then can do it in richer and deeper ways. So you want kids to keep using it, not just to learn the concept and put it aside, but then make use of it.
In almost every talk that I see you kind of speak, you always had at least one story about a student kind of or a kid that did something amazing that inspired you to kind of to continue the work that you're doing. And I'm wondering, like, why? Like, is it a conscious thing that you always have to kind of show these stories, and how important these stories are for you?
But maybe two things come to my mind. One is that's what inspires me. Like when I look at the Scratch website and I see what kids are creating, that's what keeps me excited. Because even though we were the ones who developed the tool, and even though it's been out for more than 15 years now, when I look at the site, I still get surprised and delighted by what kids are doing with it. So that's what keeps me excited, because they continue to do things I never thought about, and I keep learning from what they're doing. So it's partly for that. But the other reason is, I think if we want to help other people appreciate why we think this is important, telling the stories of individual kids or groups of kids is the best way of doing it, because they can then get a better appreciation for how the child is being transformed by this experience. So I want the people I'm talking to appreciate that, not just to appreciate how the nice design or the technical concepts they're learning, but how the child is transformed by the experience. So I think that's the important message I want to get across, and I think it's best done by telling the real stories of real kids.
Early on as a design process, and we talked about how iterative almost every week you are putting a new version, but obviously now it's a mature tool, and it's probably the iterations are kind of slowed down, and at some point you made the decision that you have to spin it outside of the Media Lab, so to become its own organization. How does it feel not to be in it, like on a daily basis for you?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So Scratch used to be developed right outside my office, right out there. And partly as Scratch, as more and more people were using it, and our team got bigger and bigger. So our team got too big for the space here, and we didn't have enough space. But also it needed somewhat, a different type of organizational structure. So we did spin it out to a separate nonprofit. And I'm still involved, but just in like at the board. I'm not involved day to day. And
did you feel like you needed to move with it? To move with it outside of the Media Lab? Or that was never really an option?
Actually, when it first moved out, I took like a 6-month sabbatical, and I helped it with the transition. But I didn't think that's what I wanted to do, because also as it got bigger, there was more involved in just managing the organization. And that's not where I want to put my time. So I wanted to keep thinking about the new ways to let kids, express themselves, and new ways of sharing the ideas is what motivated me. So I'm still involved with that and give advice for it. But then back here at MIT, we started to work on some offshoots of Scratch and do new things. And I love being at the beginning of new projects. So like one offshoot of Scratch that we've been working on for the last couple of years is this project called Octo Studio, which is inspired by Scratch, but specifically for mobile devices. Because Scratch was designed, more than 20 years ago, before most people had mobile devices, or very, very few people had mobile devices. And it was designed for laptops and desktops. And it's not so easy just to squeeze it down to a smaller device. So we started over, again, my colleague Natalie Rusk has been leading the effort and thinking, how can we let kids use their phones and tablets, not just for watching videos or scrolling through social media, but to design, create, express themselves. So that's been exciting for the last few years. And we see the same type of, the same way that Scratch opened up new possibilities. On mobile devices, you can use the sensors and take it outside with you. So it opens up new types of projects. So it's been exciting to go through that cycle again.
But I'm guessing for like 15, 20 years, you were working on this thing that took on its own life with, potentially there will be 200 million users soon. Is it hard to kind of not leave that behind completely, but not be involved with it on a daily basis and go back to the roots of like, I want to tinker again and I want to do like smaller things in the hope that these things also can become as big as that?
Well, I was always trying to do some tinkering of small things on the side, but it is somewhat difficult because I cared a lot about Scratch and it's having a big impact on the world. So I want to try to, be involved. And of course, it sometimes can be frustrating that, and I'm less involved. Some things might happen that I'm not as excited about. I wish they did this differently.
Do you take the phone and call them and it's like, I don't like that?
Well, that's sometimes, yes. Just happened last week. I sent an email. But obviously, it's not good for me too involved and have to allow other people to do it. But I do think it's something that trying to figure out how to create an environment, but let others continue to grow it after that.
I was just listening to the last podcast by Ezra Klein, and they were talking about kids and screens. Obviously, to learn to be on Scratch, to learn creative coding, you have to be in front of a screen. And even for us, I at the school at NuVu, it's a lot easier for the kids to be engaged when they are doing physical stuff, and it's hands-on and it's just very occupied with that. The minute you put them in front of a screen, the kids who are super motivated and engaged, they don't have an issue by focusing on the task on the task at hand. But then the computers and the way they are designed, there are just like so many distractions. How do you see screens and kids?
Again, I do think it depends on how it gets used. I sometimes say when parents are concerned, and some of them will try to eliminate screen time or minimize screen time. What I often say is, rather than minimize screen time, maximize creativity time. And creativity time can take on different forms. Some kids might want to do origami or watercolors, and that's great. Those are types of creativity. Some kids might want to create Scratch projects. That's another type of creativity. So for me, what's most important is maximizing creativity time. And you're right, with each different form of creativity, there could be different distractions in all of them. And maybe they're more on screens, but trying to set up the environment in a way that is enabling kids to do the creativity. Also, not necessarily saying there's two separate worlds. We try to do a lot of things, mixing the digital and the physical, especially now with Octa Studio on smaller devices. You can embed smaller devices in the physical. Recently, a few of us, we have a collaborator in Korea. We just were there and did a workshop where it made me remember when I was in elementary school, we always used to make dioramas. We'd bring in a shoebox from home with different craft materials. And if you're studying the French Revolution, you'd make a little diorama about a scene from the French Revolution. So here, kids were again making dioramas, but putting their phone as part of the diorama. So it made the diorama dynamic and interactive. So they were still working with physical materials and making the cardboard in different ways and cutting out the craft materials. Then thinking, how can they use this? And I do like seeing the digital as just another craft material. So in some ways, that was a way that really helped see it as another craft material and mix the two of trying to use what each is best for. That screens can be good for some things, physical things are good for some things, and choose whatever's best for what you're doing.
For the last part of this conversation, I just want to zoom out maybe a lot to kind of just focus on kind of creative education in general. And I wanted to get to AI first, but then it's like we might be running out of time a little bit. So I wanted to kind of talk about Syria, where I'm from. As I was finishing my PhD around 2010, I had the idea with a group of students at MIT to start this new university in Syria. The revolution started. the political situation at the time made it really impossible to kind of make something happen. But after not going there for 17 years, 2 months ago, I ended up visiting just to kind of see how it is. And, there's a lot of destruction, a lot of poverty, but, it's also amazing to see that sense of hope that everybody has and the energy everybody is trying to kind of, make something happen out of the rubbles almost. And, for someone like you who has been really embedded in kids and education for the last 30, 40 years, if we are thinking about rebuilding that system from the ground up, what are some of the things that we need to kind of pay attention to, what we need to avoid?
Well, it really does seem like an exciting opportunity, and it's great that you're able to go back and rethink it. And it does feel that oftentimes there can be new opportunities when it isn't a transition time, because people might be more willing to accept change. As one of the things that makes it hard to bring about change in education, education typically doesn't change so easily. There's a lot of resistance. There's structures in place that are hard to change. People's mindsets are hard to change. Sometimes when there's been really challenging situations, as there has been in Syria, hopefully it opens up people's minds to say, we need to do things differently. Hopefully there'll be an opportunity for you to be able to engage with people to say, what type of people do we want for our society in the future, and how do we build a school that'll support those? These days, the phrase that we use when we talk about what our goals are, we talk about we want to support young people developing as creative, curious, caring, and collaborative learners. And we think in today's world where there's so much change, more than learning any particular facts or particular skills, being creative, curious, caring, and collaborative will be more important in the future than ever. So I do think hopefully other people would also embrace that. But then having the conversation, what type of education do we need to help young people develop those qualities? And hopefully that could be a starting point to have people think about, because if you don't have if you're not aligned on the goals, you're not going to come up with agreement on how to set up the space. So hopefully you can get people aligned on those goals and then think, what are the right ways of setting up the space?
So let's say we're able to convince people that this is, we want to produce, a new generation of creative kind of problem solvers who are able to kind of deal with the rebuilding of the country. But how do you kind of create the conditions that would allow this to happen? I know that you have been very close to Reggio Emilia, and I wonder, how did they manage to do it at scale?
And again, with some success and also with some challenges. So again, I was really inspired by the schools in Reggio, which, as you know, the schools in Reggio, they started in 1945, and also at a time of critical change. And in fact, they started directly in reaction to the fascism in Italy. So they wanted to create a democratic, society, and then how could they make schools to help the next generation grow up as full citizens in a free democratic society. They were thinking from the beginning. And in Reggio, they really wanted to, do that in a way to let children, be able to express themselves, develop their own voice. And in Reggio, one metaphor they used, they talked about the 100 languages of children. And when they said the 100 languages, the founder of the Reggio schools, Laura Smolaguzzi, they said that the child has 100 languages, 100 hands, 100 ways of playing, of learning, 100 ways of all these different things. They said, and sometimes we steal 99. That schools squelch it down. So the Reggio schools want to make sure that children could explore many different ways of expressing themselves, and that different children could express themselves in their own ways. So I think they always kept that at the center of what they're doing. Let the child explore and experiment in different ways, and let different children find their own pathways. And I do think having some core message like that is really important for helping people understand and to stay true to a set of guiding principles. So I think that's really helped in Reggio. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I think we discussed, the person who's led the Reggio movement for the last several decades, Carla Rinaldi, passed away last month. So I've been, thinking a lot about her and how to help, continue her tradition. And I do think trying to follow some of those ideas with a new school in Syria would make Carla very, very happy, to say how those ideas could take root in different places. And I think we talk about sort of a pluralistic society of letting many different voices develop and unfold, and trying to make sure have a school that enables that to happen. We signed it.
Yeah, probably in the context of Syria, like sometimes it feels overwhelming to me, just thinking about like a scale of the whole country, and when we talk to people about creative education there, I think the response is like, but we need to rebuild the school first, because I think that the estimate is that 8,000 schools got destroyed during the war. And so I'm trying to kind of seed those ideas while everybody is trying to kind of make ends meet has been a little bit of a challenge, for sure.
But there's certainly are pragmatic sides. I mean, you're going to have a place. If you need a place, for this to happen, you have to make sure that goes well. On the other hand, I do think that too often people pay so much attention to the pragmatics, and then they try to structure everything, and it leads to conformity. So trying to stay away from everything just funneling into conformity is an important part. So you have to have the right combination. There needs to be some structures you put in place, but then allow a lot of variation within it. I think we've talked about that. All education is trying to find the right balance between structure and freedom. There needs to be structures, and to put the right structures in place that allow freedom to happen and allow people to have the agency to do the things they want. We also need, or I sometimes say, you want people to have the freedom and the agency to dream, but then enough support to make their dreams come to reality. If you just have dreams, that's also not very satisfying. So you need the support to make sure those dreams can turn into realities.
No, I mean, for me, like, I think that a big part of my goal now is to kind of start that conversation with everybody there, just to kind of get them hopefully inspired by what,
And I do think some of it is get started with, you can start small and make something work, and that will influence people, because just describing it won't always communicate to everybody. So starting something which serves as a model, and people can see it working and say, that could work for us too. Or they might say, well, part of that would work for us, but we would need to adapt it. And that also will happen. It's not going to be one cookie cutter thing for every school in Syria, but hopefully those models will serve as inspirations for others to do related things, and take some of it and continue to remix and adapt it in different ways.
My dream is that
Hi, Mitch and Saeed. Sorry to interrupt. We could listen to you.
We
just wanted to take a moment to remind people that we're at the Q&A. We're getting towards the Q&A portion, and that they can add a question in the chat. I know you've touched on so many relevant topics to all these incredible educators that we have here in attendance. But I thought while people are putting their questions in the chat, perhaps you guys could both take a turn to speak to what's giving you hope right now.
Well,
is this?
Should I start?
Yeah.
Because to get hope, I look locally as opposed to globally. There are a lot of things that are not very hopeful as I look, certainly in the United States today, and many things around the world are things that got me very distressed. So the things that give me most hope is when I look at again these inspiring things that I see a child create, or an inspired interaction between a group of children. And again, I think about to tell the story about a couple of years ago, right after Russia invaded Ukraine. I got an email from a Ukrainian educator, Alicia Vlasy, who, in this incredibly difficult situation in Ukraine, she wrote to me and she says, we have to find a way to create waves of kindness. And she said, we need waves of kindness for changing the world. And and said we can start small with a little ripple. And she asked us to use Scratch, and we then used the Scratch community where kids would make little projects about how to support kindness in their community.
Wow.
And I think that what Alicia was saying was these little things can add up. These little ripples of kindness can lead to waves of kindness, can lead to a culture of kindness. And of course, it was not going to stop the invasion of Ukraine just by doing this. But she said that if we want to get the type of society we want in the future, we need to start with these local acts where people engage with each other. And maybe it also resonated with me when I said that these days we say creative, curious, caring, and collaborative learners. The kindness was, I think, the things that we've done that work best have been when young people are not just creating something special, but also engaging with one another in an empathetic way and working together in a way that they have an appreciation of one another. So when I see those things like that happening, it gives me hope. But of course, there's still lots of work that needs to be done to let those ripples turn into waves, to turn into a cultural change. Is a big effort, and it requires efforts from lots of us, everyone on this call, and lots of more to make that happen.
When we were talking initially about like how to change things in Syria, my hope is that in 5 years, Mitch is gonna come to Syria and he's gonna see an experiment that he has not seen before in terms of creative education at a scale. So hopefully we can set the conditions there that would allow us to get there.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to visiting.
Hopefully we'll get you there before 5 years. But yeah.
Thank you both for answering that. We have a great question from Saida. She says, what are your thoughts about AI these days? How's it changing education and kids themselves?
As if you're not talking enough about it. So this is now
Should I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I guess, these days you can't have a discussion around education without talking about AI. I guess we mentioned just a little bit in the beginning when we said there are these different waves. And I do think that there's the computer wave, the internet wave, now the AI wave. And I think with each of these, there are lots of things that cause me concern with AI. And a lot of the concerns that I have are actually, it's a little different than others. Some people are concerned because AI is going to have hallucinations and give you bad information, or AI is a problem because kids will hand in AI-generated assignments and cheat in those ways. And those are problems, but those aren't the big issues for me. The big issue for me is that AI might further entrench some traditional approaches to education that I think we need to reform, because it can make it easier and better to do a traditional delivery of information type of education. And people show with AI, we can deliver instruction 6% better. And then people will say, we have to get this. Those are things that worry me. At the same time, I think they're real opportunities, but only if we take advantage of them. Obviously the type of things that I think have connected us over the years is this belief in a project-based, interest-driven, community-oriented approach to education. And if we think seriously about, could we use AI to support project-based, interest-driven, community-oriented approach to education, I think there are ways we might do it. And I hope to put more energy there. I worry that a lot of the ed tech companies aren't doing that, but I think it's possible. So I think that's what we would want to do. And it's not something where I don't want the AI to take over. I want the child to stay at the center. On the other hand, the same way when the child is working on a project and they run into a problem, they might look up a YouTube video where they get some inspiration. I think it's okay if they then ask an AI a question to get some inspiration. They should also ask a friend a question. But children should have all these different ways of supporting them, whether it's asking a friend, asking a teacher, looking at a YouTube video, doing a Google search, or asking an AI agent. Those could all be ways of, if it's just another resource that kids can use to help them as they're doing things, that could be something that is useful, but only if we set it up the right way.
I mean, the question that I have around AI now, as we're talking about these different bubbles, the format of education that we have has not changed since 1890. And even for me, since we started NuVu in 2010, we've seen a lot of trends come and go, and the system itself, at the core of it, has not really changed one bit. a lot of the innovation in a lot of schools happen, as I see it, on the periphery always, and they just move from trend to trend. But the core, because the system is so interconnected and moving, especially like getting into a college, you need to have a lot of requirements and all of that. And so I'm always kind of thinking these days, is AI going to be enough of a shock or something that will kind of move the system in a different direction? Then do you think it will be powerful enough to kind of change things?
I think there's a chance, because I do think it is going to be a seismic change in the culture. Forget about education for a minute. It is going to lead to big change in the culture. So maybe that shakes people enough where they say, we need a different education, and it starts that conversation. So my hope is it could be a moment of change where we can have the type of discussions we've been wanting to have for a long time, to have people rethink education, because there's a need for rethinking, AI or not, and maybe this gives us the opportunity. I'm not sure if that will be the case, but we should push to make that the case, because as people see that there's this real disruption happening, we should say, with this disruption, we need to rethink what are the real goals of education, what is important to us. Well, the same way when we said in Syria, because of the the turmoil that it's gone through, it could be a moment of change. AI is another type of disruption that maybe leads to a moment of change where people can rethink and revisit what are the important goals of education. And maybe because AI can be especially good at doing sort of the mundane routine things, we can say we don't need to teach the mundane routine things, and we can focus more on the project-based, interest-driven, design-oriented approaches that we think are important.
That's the hope.
Yes.
We just have
a couple work to make that happen.
That's right. We just have a couple minutes left, but we have one more question for you. So this is about, and we get this a lot at NuVu, assessment's a tough nut to crack in creative education. How have each of you approached evaluating student learning without diminishing the creative process? Should we be evaluating students at all?
I had this in the middle, and I decided to take it out of it because we'll start with you first to see how you think about it.
Yeah. Well, the fact is, people want to know, there's some accountability that is reasonable. That, you want an educational system to be accountable. So it's understandable why people want to have some sense is something working or not. So I don't want to reject that. But the approaches to assessment, I think, are really problematic. That, oftentimes, as many people have said, that we sort of assess the things that can be most easily assessed, but those aren't necessarily the most important things. So we've always gone more in the direction of trying to, rather than sort of trying to measure what people have learned, to document what they learned, to show portfolios of what people have learned. And actually, it's the way that, like, as a professor at MIT, that's how I'm assessed. I don't have to go in and take a test where I get graded on a numerical scale, but people look at what I've produced and say, is this something that's making valuable, change? And I would hope that students could be done the same way. Look at a portfolio of what they've done, and you can see a progress of the different things they've done. I'd look to see, is there a diversity in what they've done? You don't want people doing the same thing over and over. You want to see if they're, growing in sophistication in the way they think about certain things. And it's not that it's going to be easy to do that. You won't be able to numerically do it. But I do think that, that you can have ways of meaningfully looking at a portfolio of projects and getting a sense of, what's working and what's not.
I mean, this is a story from the early days of NuVu that kind of really stayed with me. Me and the coaches were talking about one student in particular, and we had some question mark about the quality of the work and the rigor and how much they learned, and our understanding of it was not really at the level that we wanted to be. And then that it happened that same day. I was just walking outside with the student, and I was asking it, like, how did the studio go? And he was really excited to tell me about the project, how much he learned, and all the concepts that he internalized. And I felt like almost like really small at that, like, who am I? Yeah, I am the principal and talking with it, like, but who am I? Like, who gave me the agency to almost decide like how much the kid learned? And I'm hearing from them, and they learned a lot already. And so that really kind of stayed with me that all the way. We're kind of designing these assessment tools, and almost like for the last 15 years, almost every year we come up with a system because we've never been able to kind of really capture the right. But the guiding principle has always been is that if we have a system, that system should serve the students first.
Yeah.
It is not really to judge them, it's not to evaluate them, but is it giving them some ideas or notions about how they are progressing in their creative journey. And with varying degrees of success, I think we've been kind of like zeroing down on that goal, and that has been really the in some ways the guiding principle for us.
And that makes sense. It also reminds me when I was talking about the portfolio of things they produce, it's important that it's not just about the artifacts they produce, but also how they talk about it. So the fact you had that conversation to me is really important. There's a lot you can learn by just talking about the process they've gone through and how they think about it, how they describe it is an important part of getting a sense of how they're learning, and also then to give them feedback about things and suggestions and support.
So Jocelyn, are there more questions, or we passed our time?
I think we're at time. Yes, we got a lot of fabulously busy educators in the room, but yes, thank you so much. You hit the main questions. There was some convergence on them, so you hit the main questions. Thank you.
And a big appreciation for everybody that came, because I think we all know that we can talk about these ideas, but the place that really makes a difference is when educators out there put them into practice. I know there are a lot of people there watching who are the ones who are really doing the hard work of putting these ideas into practice. A big appreciation for everyone who's doing that.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone who came. Thank you for a lovely Creative Educator Series this year. We're looking forward to having you again next year. Take care. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Saeed. This is fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.